What if I told you that it is possible to survive the fiercest blizzard in open terrain without tents or warm sleeping bags? This exceeded all expectations of the researchers who saw it for the first time. The Native American tribes of North America, whose lives were spent in the vast Great Plains and cold forests, developed remarkable survival techniques that seem incredible to modern man. Their strength lay not in technology, but in their profound knowledge of nature and their ability to use its laws for their own protection. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how the ancient secrets of the Indians can change your perception of survival in extreme conditions. I discovered this by accident while studying ancient evidence. What if everything you've been taught about cold weather is outdated? We are used to thinking of snow as a hostile element, synonymous with cold and danger. Indigenous peoples, such as the tribes of the Great Plains, the Lakota, Crow, and Cheyenne, viewed snow in a completely different way, seeing it not as a threat, but as a valuable building and insulating material. They knew that snow, thanks to its structure, is capable of retaining heat and protecting against the wind better than many artificial materials. It was this knowledge that formed the basis of their unique winter survival strategies in the open country. Far from their teepees, the art of surviving a blizzard began with giving up the fight against the elements and moving towards cooperation with them. This radical shift in perception was the first and most important lesson they learned during centuries of living in a harsh climate. This is where their skill in creating temporary shelters that could save lives, even in the most ferocious blizzard, came from. The main construction technique was the erection of snow walls. Warriors or hunters caught in a blizzard without shelter would quickly find a place protected from the direct wind and begin to build a low barrier. This waist-high wall created a calm zone where the wind speed dropped to almost zero, which immediately reduced heat loss. They used dense snow for construction, often compacting it so that the wall would not collapse under the force of the wind. They worked quickly and efficiently, understanding that every minute lost brought them closer to hypothermia, and that collective labor accelerated the process. Wind protection was the #1 priority, as it is the wind. Not just the low temperature, that is the main enemy in a blizzard. The wind chill effect can lower the perceived temperature by tens of degrees, quickly causing frostbite and hypothermia. The snow barrier not only blocked the wind, but also allowed the heat emanating from people's bodies to accumulate in the resulting calm. This simple physical trick turned a deadly place into a relatively safe zone where it was possible to survive the most difficult hours. Under this protective wall, they cleared a place to sleep. The floor was usually lined with fir branches or dry grass, if available, to create an insulating layer between their bodies and the cold ground or snow. This layer was critical as it prevented direct heat loss through thermal conductivity. Even a thin layer of branches significantly improved sleeping conditions by preventing moisture and cold from the ground from penetrating their bodies. For Native Americans, who were accustomed to sleeping on the ground in all seasons, this was a simple addition to their usual rituals. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? What interested you most about this unique approach to snow? Write about it in the comments. Are you ready for the shocking truth? The most effective and vital element of indigenous people's survival on cold, merciless nights was so simple that many modern people would not even believe in its effectiveness. It required no tools, no complex structures, and no pre-prepared shelter. That element was group sleeping, a strategic, thoughtful form of collective heating that turned several people lying on the snow or frozen ground into one large, self-heating, living stove. This practice was not accidental or a habit that arose spontaneously. It was the result of centuries of observation and experience passed down from generation to generation. Indigenous peoples knew that a single person, even one who was strong and resilient, would quickly lose the battle against the cold. But together, people became an indestructible team, capable of withstanding any cold, no matter how sudden and fierce it was. In conditions where blizzards struck without warning, covering everything around them, and there was neither time nor strength to build a sturdy shelter, collective action became the only chance. Such sleep not only warmed the body, it strengthened the spirit, reinforced the sense of unity, mutual assistance, and trust within the group. Group sleep worked on a simple but ingenious principle, reducing the area of heat exchange with the environment. People lay as close to each other as possible, pressing their sides, backs, arms, and legs together, creating a dense, almost compact structure. A minimal part of their surface was in contact with the icy air, and the maximum part was in contact with the bodies of their neighbors, who gave off their heat. In fact, there was a redistribution of thermal energy inside the cocoon. No one cooled down quickly because they were constantly receiving heat from others. The nature of the human body did all the work. Metabolism maintained heat generation, and close contact prevented it from dissipating. The key to this living furnace was the organization of the interior space. The center was always the warmest place, and it was often given to the weakest, sickest, or most exhausted member of the group. This not only saved the life of an individual, but also ensured that the whole group remained strong. A warrior or hunter who received warmth from his companions at night could continue on in the morning, conserving his strength. To avoid hypothermia for those lying on the edges, people often changed places, spending approximately equal time in the center and on the periphery. This rotation was an important part of the tactic and demonstrated a high level of social organization even in extreme conditions. But it wasn't just bodies that generated heat. It was important to keep that heat inside. The carefully arranged cocoon was covered with whatever was at hand: animal skins, felt blankets, spare clothing. Any material could play a role if it created an extra layer between people and the outside cold. The best furs, bison, bear, or deer skins, were always used as the top layer because they retained heat longer. It is important to note that this practice was known not only to the tribes of the Great Plains, but also to the peoples of the subarctic, the Cree, Athabascans, and Dean, for whom group sleeping was part of their daily routine and rules of survival. The effect of such collective heating was astonishingly effective. Several people lying close together could maintain a temperature inside the cocoon that was sufficient for peaceful sleep, even if it was bitterly cold outside, capable of freezing water in a matter of seconds. It was a victory of collective intelligence over harsh nature. It was a demonstration that humans are capable of surviving not only through strength, but also through cooperation. This method worked without fire, without fuel, without tools. It was a biological blanket, alive and self-sustaining. But this practice had not only physical, but also powerful psychological significance. In a blizzard, when only the howling wind can be heard and stinging snow hits your face, it is easy to succumb to panic and despair. However, physical closeness, the feeling of warmth, the breath of comrades nearby, all this became a protection not only from the cold, but also from loneliness. People felt part of a whole, understanding that there were others nearby who shared the risk and were fighting for survival. This strengthened the spirit, gave confidence, and kept the mind clear. Group sleeping was not just a way to keep warm, it was a tactical technique perfected to perfection. It made people stronger than the thickest snow wall or the most skillfully constructed shelter. It was this ability of the tribes to organize instantly and take clear, collective action in the face of mortal danger that amazed the first European explorers. They witnessed groups of people who seemed doomed to perish, waking up in the morning alive, alert, and ready for a new journey. If this method seems surprising to you, wait. In the next chapter, you will learn how Native Americans used one of the most common elements of the winter landscape to create almost perfect natural insulation. Are you ready to learn how simply digging a hole could save a life? You've definitely never heard of this unique secret. When time and energy allowed, Native Americans used another unique survival method, creating a cocoon pit in the snow. It was more than just a snow cave. It was a clever way to use the physical properties of snow and earth to create the perfect thermal shelter, without the need for complex construction. This tactic was more commonly used when a blizzard was just beginning, or when a group was forced to stop for a few hours. This method was based on the knowledge that the temperature of the snow at depth is much higher than at the surface. At a depth of about 1 meter, the snow cover acts as an excellent insulator, maintaining a temperature of around 0 degrees Celsius, even when the outside temperature reaches 30 degrees below zero. This temperature is sufficient to avoid hypothermia and survive. They knew that they needed to dig down to the ground if possible, or simply to a denser layer of snow to create a chamber. To do this, they used the simplest tools, a shovel made of bone, wood, or even just their own hands and snowshoes. First, they dug a shallow pit, large enough for the whole group to lie down tightly, curled up, or using the group's sleeping technique. It was important that the pit was not too wide to minimize the airspace that needed to be heated. The closer people lay together, the more effective the heating system was. The walls and bottom of the pit served as an excellent insulator, preventing heat from escaping. The snow removed from the pit was used to build a windbreak around the perimeter. After the people lay down in the pit, they covered it from above. Ideally, animal skins were used, but if they were not available, branches, dense snow, and blankets were used. The main task was to create a small, insulated space, a kind of thermal cocoon. A small ventilation hole was always left for fresh air to enter. Without this hole, carbon dioxide would quickly accumulate and people could suffocate. This cocoon worked on the principle of a thermos. The walls and roof, made of snow or skins, retained the heat generated by the bodies, and the small airspace inside quickly warmed up to an acceptable temperature. This method was especially effective when it was not possible to build a fire due to strong winds or a lack of dry fuel. The snow around it provided an additional protective layer, which helped. Psychologically, the pit cocoon provided a sense of security and shelter. Underneath the layer of snow and skins, people were protected from the noise and fury of the blizzard, allowing them to relax and fall asleep. Sleep in such conditions was vital, as it allowed them to regain strength and conserve energy that would otherwise be spent fighting the cold. In this way, the Indians turned the snow cover, which was an insurmountable obstacle for Europeans, into a kind of home. This invention is a striking example of how a deep understanding of the physics of natural materials can form the basis for effective survival technology. It proves that ingenious solutions often lie in simplicity and harmony with nature. Don't forget to like this video if you didn't know about this secret before. What you are about to learn will change your perception of clothing. We are used to thinking that modern hiking jackets, down jackets, and thermal underwear are the pinnacle of engineering. But long before the advent of synthetic fabrics, membranes, and laboratory research, the indigenous peoples of North America already mastered the art of creating the perfect winter clothing. Their secret to surviving the harsh cold was not only in their clever shelters and effective methods of retaining heat, but also in the amazingly well-thought-out clothing system that they created with their own hands. This system worked on a principle that is now known throughout the world as layering. But unlike modern research developed in universities and scientific centers, their principle arose from generations of observation, trial and error, experience, and interaction with nature. People living in the harsh winters of the Great Plains, Rocky Mountains, and northern boreal forests knew very well that it was not the thickness of clothing that saved them, but the air trapped between its layers. It acts as an invisible barrier that prevents heat loss and turns clothing into a miniature thermos. The winter clothing of these peoples consisted of a whole ensemble of several carefully calculated elements. The bottom layer consisted of soft shirts and leggings made of tan leather or suede, and in more northern regions, thin fur undergarments. These materials wick moisture away from the body, allowing the skin to remain dry. Dryness is the first rule of survival in the cold. A wet body loses heat rapidly, and even slight perspiration can lead to dangerous hypothermia. Interestingly, they deliberately avoided pure wool, as it gets wet faster, freezes in the cold, and begins to prickle unpleasantly against the skin. Treated leather, on the other hand, retained its flexibility, repelled moisture, and remained comfortable even at the lowest temperatures. The middle layer was the heart of the entire system. It consisted of heavy warm tunics, cloaks, or capes made of thick animal skins, most often bison, deer, elk, or bear. These skins were almost always worn with the fur on the inside to create maximum thermal insulation. Fur is a natural heat accumulator created by nature itself. Each hair traps a microscopic layer of air around itself. 1 square centimeter of fur can contain thousands of such air chambers. This is not just clothing. It is a real biological heat preservation system capable of protecting a person from the cold, in which metal crunches in their hands. To make such a skin softer, lighter, and more resistant to moisture, they were impregnated with natural fats, carefully kneaded or smoked. Each tribe had its own processing secrets. The outer layer of clothing served as what we would today call a membrane shell. It was a cape or cloak made of finely tanned leather, impregnated with fat, oil, or a mixture of natural waxes. It kept out the wind, protected against freezing rain, and prevented the inner layers from getting wet. Even a light leather cape, when properly treated, could become armor against gusts of wind that would otherwise rob you of heat in an instant. In blizzard conditions, this function was no less important than thermal insulation itself. Wind can negate any efforts if it is not stopped at the outer layer. But the clothing of indigenous peoples was thought out to the smallest detail. Every detail was important. Headgear was made from beaver, fox, or otter fur. It tightly covered the ears, neck, and forehead, areas through which a person loses up to a third of their body heat. Mittens, not gloves, were a must. Inside the mittens, the fingers could warm each other, creating a common volume of heat. Gloves separate the fingers, increasing the cooling area, a luxury that people living at temperatures of 30 or 40 degrees could not afford. Feet were protected with moccasins, and here folk wisdom was particularly evident. The moccasins were stuffed with dry grass, moss, or lichen, which acted as both a natural insole and an absorbent. They retained an extra layer of air, wicked away moisture, and prevented frostbite. Sometimes additional leather or fur covers were worn over the moccasins, similar to modern gaiters. All clothing was loose-fitting, did not restrict movement, and allowed blood to circulate freely. This is a key point. Even the most ideal materials will not help if the clothing constricts the body. Loose fit was not a style choice, it was a necessity. It allowed people to move for long periods of time, hunt, travel long distances, and stay warm even in the biting wind. The main advantage of the layered system was the ability to regulate heat exchange. During active movement, running, walking, hunting, a person could remove the top layer to avoid sweating. Sweat is the main enemy in the cold. It cools the body as quickly as ice water. But when it was time to rest, pause, or spend the night, it was enough to put the cloak back on to retain valuable heat. Thus, the winter clothing of indigenous peoples was not just a set of wardrobe items. It was a true mobile survival system. Flexible, adaptive, designed for the harshest climatic conditions, it allowed people to live, travel, hunt, and perform hard work in conditions that would be deadly for an unprepared person. That is why this clothing can be called the pinnacle of applied engineering, created without science but with ingenious precision. Now here's a question for you. What do you know about other ways ancient peoples around the world protected themselves from the cold? Want to learn about snow houses, grass insulation, or breathing techniques that kept people warm without fire? In snow and frost, protecting the feet became a matter of life and death, as they were the most vulnerable part of the body. Being furthest from the heart, the feet were the first to lose heat, and if blood circulation ceased, freezing occurred surprisingly quickly. Indigenous peoples understood perfectly well that even the most sophisticated clothing system would not save a person if their feet were wet or covered with ice. Therefore, they created a surprisingly complex and effective footwear system that combined lightness, warmth, flexibility, and the ability to adapt to deep snow. This system allowed people to travel long distances, hunt all day, and move between camps even when the weather seemed absolutely merciless. The main type of winter footwear was moccasins, but their winter versions differed significantly from their summer counterparts. Summer moccasins were soft and light, while winter ones were made of thicker leather, usually durable bison or elk hide, which retained heat well and did not tear when in constant contact with snow and ice. The most important thing was not only what the shoes were made of, but also what was inside them. Instead of the socks we are used to, indigenous peoples used a thick layer of dry grass, animal wool, moss, or shredded bark. These natural materials created a dense insulating layer that trapped air. It was the air that provided warmth and prevented hypothermia. This filling absorbed moisture, keeping the feet dry, and when the grass got wet, it was simply replaced with new grass. It was a simple yet ingenious method, proven over thousands of winters. To increase protection from the cold, leather or fur covers were worn over the moccasins, completely covering the ankle and lower leg. These covers were especially important in deep snow, where shoes were at risk of filling with snow with every step. The covers were tightly fastened around the leg and created a second protective barrier against wind, ice chips, and moisture. Soft but very dense leather was used for these elements, which was impregnated with fat to make it almost waterproof. This treatment turned the covers into a natural protective screen that prevented wet snow from sticking and even prevented freezing to some extent. However, snowshoes were a real help in snowy conditions. They were necessary not only for hunters, but also for anyone who moved between camps or found themselves in a blizzard far from shelter. Snowshoes distributed body weight evenly over a wide surface, preventing people from sinking into loose snow. This saved enormous amounts of energy, allowing them to conserve their strength for hunting or building camps, and enabled them to move quickly even through deep snowdrifts. Snowshoes were made from light and flexible wooden frames, most often from young birch or willow. The inside was covered with strips of rawhide, which became hard and elastic after drying, but did not break in the cold. The shape of snowshoes depended on the terrain. People living in dense forests made them long and narrow for maneuverability, while those living on open plains preferred wider versions that better supported weight on soft snow. When spending the night in the snow, moccasins had to be taken off. This was not just a rule, but a necessity. The inner grass insoles were removed, dried by the fire, or, if it was not possible to light a fire, replaced with new ones. Sleeping in wet moccasins meant putting yourself at mortal risk, because moisture increased heat loss and could lead to frostbite in just a few hours. Experienced hunters always took a small supply of dry grass or moss with them, even if they were only going on a short trip. It was one of those little survival secrets that was passed down from generation to generation and was considered as important as knowing winter trails or how to build a fire. Thus, the footwear of indigenous peoples became a multi-component system, where each element played its own role. The inner lining kept the feet warm and dry, the moccasins protected them from contact with snow, the covers created a barrier against the wind, and the snowshoes ensured freedom of movement on snow-covered surfaces. Altogether, this worked much more effectively than the European boots of the time, which often got wet, cracked, or became heavy in the cold. In the harsh American winters, this traditional system was a true survival technology, created by nature and perfected by people who learned to live in harmony with the coldest landscapes. Ready to learn a secret that has been passed down from generation to generation? When hunters or small groups had the opportunity to stay for a long time, they used another method borrowed from their northern neighbors or developed on their own, creating a snow shelter similar to an igloo. This was a more substantial and warmer structure than a simple snow wall or pit. Many travelers noted that it was these shelters that often saved people from death during long journeys across the snow-covered tundra. Snow there served not only as a building material, but as real protection from the cold and wind. That is why such shelters became an important part of survival in the northern regions. Although the classic igloo is considered a symbol of Arctic peoples such as the Inuit, the principles of using snow for construction were also known to subarctic tribes such as the Cree and Athabascan. For centuries, these peoples passed down knowledge about how to choose the right place for construction and which snow was best suited for the task. They understood that loose snow was unsuitable and that they needed to look for snow that had already settled under its own weight. Such knowledge came with experience and observation of nature. Thanks to this, even a small group of people could create a safe place to sleep. The principle of the snow house was the same as that of the pit cocoon, but perfected. It allowed the heat generated by people's breath and body heat to be retained inside. Compacted snow was used to build a domed shelter, and the denser it was, the more reliable the structure became. Snow was surprisingly good at insulating, even though it seems light and airy. It blocked the cold wind, which can be especially harsh in open spaces. This made it much warmer inside than outside. The snow used to build such a shelter has a special structure that makes it both strong and light at the same time. Each snowflake contains many air pockets, and it is these that retain heat. These pockets create a natural thermos effect, which helps to maintain the temperature not only at night, but also during daytime frosts. Therefore, a snow house was a reliable place to rest during long journeys. The difference between the temperature inside and outside could be enormous. This often saved people's lives in harsh winter conditions. Special dense snow blocks were used for construction. First, rectangular pieces of snow were cut out, that easily held their shape and did not crumble. Then these blocks were laid in a spiral, each time pushing them so that the dome gradually closed on itself. This technique required precision, as the stability of the entire structure depended on the angle of each block. These skills were passed down from older to younger hunters, and every hunter was required to know them. Without this knowledge, survival in the harsh climate would have been much more difficult. The construction process could take several hours, but for experienced people, it was quite a routine task. They knew how to quickly assess the quality of the snow and how to distribute the work among the group members. While some cut the blocks, others began to lay out the bottom row, forming the foundation of the future shelter. From the outside, it might have seemed that the work was progressing slowly, but in fact, it was carried out smoothly and without unnecessary movements. The result was a sturdy dome that was held together solely by the correct placement of the blocks. The entrance to such a shelter was made low to keep the heat inside. Sometimes the entrance was turned into a small tunnel, so that cold air would settle in it and not get directly inside. This element made the house much warmer and safer, especially during periods of strong winds. The tunnel also protected against snowdrifts, which could completely block the direct passage. People understood that warm air rises and tried to use this property as effectively as possible. Therefore, the living area of the dome was always located above the entrance line. This made it possible to create comfortable conditions, even in severe frosts. Inside such a snow house, a bed was installed that was higher than the floor level. This was done for a reason, because cold air always sinks, while warm air rises. The bed was built from snow blocks, branches, or animal skins to increase comfort. Fur skins could be laid on it, which served as excellent protection from the cold. Over time, people noticed that even a slight elevation above the floor made sleeping much warmer. Thus, they created one of the most effective solutions for spending the night in cold conditions. The temperature difference between the floor and the bed could be very noticeable, and this greatly helped those who spent long weeks on the road. People often slept close to each other, using group sleeping techniques to share warmth. This practice was common and considered an important part of survival. Even adult hunters understood that without mutual support at night, they could quickly become hypothermic. This made it more comfortable and safer inside. It allowed them to regain their strength for the next day. Inside such a shelter, it was possible to light a small fire or use a fat lamp. A small flame provided enough heat to maintain a comfortable temperature. People took great care to keep the fire small, as a strong flame could melt the inner walls. The oil lamp burned long and evenly, illuminating the room with a soft light. Its heat raised the temperature inside the shelter to levels that allowed for restful sleep. Even a few degrees of warmth could completely change the feel of the environment. The smoke from the small fire was vented through an opening at the top of the dome. This opening also served as ventilation to keep the air inside fresh. People knew that without such ventilation, carbon monoxide could accumulate, which is dangerous to health. Therefore, they always made sure that the opening was not covered by snow. At the same time, they tried to make it small so as not to let out excess heat. In this way, they created a safe and comfortable home in the snow. It was a real house built in the harsh winter conditions, and it could withstand even a strong storm. The snow walls muffled the sound of the wind, and it became surprisingly quiet inside. People could not only sleep, but also repair equipment, prepare food, or simply wait for the weather to improve. Such shelters made traveling across the tundra less dangerous. They made it possible to wait out bad weather without wasting energy fighting the cold. Therefore, snow houses were used very widely. A snow house was an excellent shelter, but how did indigenous peoples keep warm when it was not even possible to build a wall? In situations where even building a snow wall was impossible due to complete exhaustion, strong winds, or lack of snow, the Indians relied solely on their body's internal resources. They knew how to control their metabolism to generate maximum heat. This was not magic, but a set of simple physiological techniques that helped sustain life in critical conditions. One of the first steps was to slow down breathing and movement. Excessive activity, especially in the cold, led to rapid energy expenditure and sweating, and sweat, as we know, instantly cools the body. Warriors learned to slow down all movements to minimize physical activity and conserve heat. They moved slowly and deliberately, avoiding sudden jerks. They sat or lay down, curling up into a tight ball to minimize the surface area in contact with the cold air. They used the power of food. Before a planned night in the cold, if possible, they ate fatty, high-calorie foods such as pemmican. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries, was the ideal food. The fat was digested slowly, providing the body with a steady, long-lasting source of energy that the body used for warmth. They knew that the digestive process itself generates heat. They also used techniques to stimulate blood circulation. Light massage of the limbs, especially the hands and feet, helped the blood circulate better, delivering warmth to the peripheral parts of the body. They could rub their hands to warm them up. But at the same time, they avoided rubbing frost-bitten areas so as not to damage the tissue. Another technique was the use of natural heaters. For example, they could place a hot, not too heavy stone wrapped in cloth or leather against the body under clothing. The stone, heated by the fire before it went out, gave off heat slowly and for a long time, warming vital organs. In the absence of fire, they could use stones heated under the armpits or in the groin. While the tribes of the Great Plains relied on mobile shelters, the peoples of the eastern woodlands, such as the Iroquois, developed a completely different survival strategy based on stationary large structures. In their culture, the main winter shelter was the longhouse, which became the center of community life during the cold months. It was designed to accommodate several generations at once, making it an important element of the social structure. Such houses helped people survive the harsh winters of the Northeast, where blizzards and bitter winds could last for weeks. People knew that it was difficult to survive alone, so they chose to live together, which strengthened their protection from the cold. The longhouse became not only a dwelling, but also a symbol of unity. It was not just a dwelling, but a real communal winter fortress, capable of accommodating several families and effectively protecting them from harsh conditions. Its dimensions sometimes reached such a length that it was possible to move freely inside without going outside for several days in a row. The long walls and sturdy roof retained heat, creating a stable temperature even when the weather outside was stormy. This helped people stay healthy and strong throughout the winter. The house served as a place where traditions and stories were preserved and passed on to the young. Therefore, each such building was of great importance to the culture of the people. The longhouse was a huge, elongated structure with a rounded roof resembling an upside-down boat. This shape was chosen for a reason, as it could withstand the pressure of snow and icy winds. The frame was made of thick, curved wooden poles, which were selected in advance, taking into account their strength and flexibility. These poles were joined together so that they supported each other and created a stable structure. The result was a building that could stand for decades if properly maintained. Thus, the longhouse became a long-term investment in the future of the community. The frame was covered with elm or cedar bark, carefully fitting each piece so that there were no gaps. This bark served as a natural barrier against wind and rain, keeping the interior dry. The layer of bark was thick and dense, and it was often renewed to ensure that the house remained reliable. For additional insulation, moss or dry grass was laid between the sheets of bark to retain heat and prevent the cold from penetrating. This method of construction was the result of centuries of observing nature. It made it possible to create housing that was ideally suited to the local climate. Sometimes additional reinforcements made of branches were applied to the outer surface of the house to make the walls even stronger. This helped protect the dwelling from strong gusts of wind that could tear off the bark or damage the joints. Inside, a stable microclimate was maintained, which was necessary for the life of a large group of people. Such attention to detail showed how seriously the peoples of the eastern forests took winter conditions. They understood that any damage to the house could endanger the entire community. Therefore, its maintenance was the shared responsibility of all residents. There were no interior walls inside the house. It was one long common space where each family knew its place. This open layout allowed heat to spread freely throughout the building, making it a very effective shelter. On either side of the central passageway were wide bunks that served as sleeping quarters. They were spacious enough to accommodate entire families with children. Sometimes people decorated their sections with personal items to emphasize their belonging to a particular clan. However, no one completely isolated themselves, as community was considered more important. Each family had its own section, which could differ from others in terms of decorative elements or the arrangement of items. Sometimes people separated the space with curtains or fabric partitions to create a little privacy. But even such partitions allowed heat to pass through and did not disrupt the overall structure. This shared space not only contributed to collective heating, but also strengthened social ties between families. People heard each other, shared news, and helped their neighbors if they needed support. This is how a close bond between community members was formed. During the cold winter months, the Longhouse was a reliable shelter that brought people together. It provided safety, warmth, and the opportunity to maintain a traditional way of life. Thanks to it, the community was able to preserve its knowledge and cultural customs without breaking up into separate families. It was a perfectly designed system that helped people survive even in the harshest conditions. The Longhouse became one of the most significant achievements of the peoples of the Eastern Woods. It was a home, a fortress, and a symbol of their strength all at once. Survival in a blizzard depended not only on technique, but also on psychological resilience. Indigenous peoples understood that panic and despair were enemies just as much as the cold. They developed a whole set of unwritten rules and techniques aimed at maintaining calm, discipline, and a clear mind in stressful situations. The first and most important rule was to remain calm. From childhood, warriors and hunters were taught that when faced with danger, it was necessary to stop, assess the situation, and make a decision, rather than rush around in panic. In a blizzard, this meant stopping immediately and starting to build a shelter or deciding to sleep as a group. This discipline, brought to the point of automatism, saved lives. Community played a crucial role. Everyone in the group knew their role. Experienced warriors took charge, organized construction, and distributed available resources. The young and strong did physical labor. The weaker and older members kept the fire going, if there was one, or redistributed blankets. This clear hierarchy and division of tasks prevented chaos. Rituals and routines were another pillar of psychological defense. Even in a snow pit, people tried to follow a certain sequence of actions, checking equipment, changing wet clothes, eating, and sleeping in groups. This routine created the illusion of order in a world of chaos, helping to preserve sanity and hope. Maintaining calm and discipline was invisible armor that protected them from their most terrible enemy, despair. They believed that nature was not evil, but simply indifferent. Therefore, fighting it was pointless. Instead of fighting, one had to adapt, using its laws. This philosophical approach helped them accept the situation and focus all their energy on survival. They knew that if they could hold out for a few hours, the blizzard would eventually subside. In addition to the basic techniques, indigenous peoples used less obvious but extremely effective tricks that helped them survive the harshest winters. These techniques were the result of centuries of observation of nature and its laws. One such technique was the creation of ice wells in settlements. When rivers and lakes froze to a great depth, obtaining water became a difficult task. Tribes living in permanent winter camps dug deep pits in the ground or ice to reach water. The pit, protected by snow, froze less and allowed constant access to drinking water. The water was cold, of course, but its availability was critical to preventing dehydration, which exacerbates hypothermia. Another vital secret was the winter fuel supply. Firewood harvested in the fall was not simply piled up, but carefully covered from snow and rain. Covered with thick bark or skins, the wood remained dry and burned easily in any weather. Dry fuel was as valuable a resource as food. They knew that it was impossible to survive the long winter without fire. When storing food, they also used the principles of insulation. Meat and fat buried in snow or earth remained cold, which prevented them from spoiling. Snow acted as an ideal freezer. Pemmican and dried meat were stored in leather bags that were hung or placed in shelters. Winter supplies were a sacred reserve that could only be used in cases of extreme necessity or for survival. They used stones for heating and cooking. Stones heated in a fire could be carried and used for cooking or heating shelters. In a snow house, a hot stone placed in the center could maintain the temperature for several hours. This saved firewood. They also observed animals. Knowing how animals survive blizzards, they could find a place sheltered from the wind, such as under dense fir trees or in natural crevices. By observing the behavior of deer or bison, they could predict the approach of a storm. We have seen that the survival of the indigenous peoples of North America in blizzards without shelter was not a matter of chance, but the result of a deep knowledge of nature and collective wisdom. From creating a windbreak wall out of snow to the ingenious technique of group sleeping, each method was perfectly adapted to the harsh conditions. Their ability to turn snow, cold, and wind from enemies into allies is a lesson that remains relevant today. They proved that the main tool for survival is not sophisticated equipment, but a sharp mind and an unyielding will. Which technique, the living stove of group sleep or the snow cocoon, do you find most ingenious and why? Share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on new research into the life and customs of indigenous peoples.